good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, whatever the time is where you are joining us. It's wonderful to have you here for our latest in our webinar series, our EMI webinar series on creation care. We're just waiting for a few more people to arrive, and we'll be starting shortly. As we're waiting, I should say, if you're new to this series, hi, I'm Rob Quayle. I am the Manager of Projects and Programs at Engineering Ministries International, Nicaragua. And if you are new to this series, you might be new to the fact that I have a different backdrop each time, and I am not in Nicaragua right now, I'm in Egypt. Thank you to Brad Hansen for sending me this photo. We're using backdrops of photos that in some way capture the wonder of God's creation. And thank you, Brad, for this one from the top of Mount Sinai, watching the sunrise. They were quite spectacular. Brad, I really loved what you said about this being a majestic place to reflect on God, on God's creation, and what a privilege we have to engage with it each day. So it's an inspiring backdrop. Thank you for that. So I think we've got a number of people in the room already, and I know a lot of people will be watching this recorded on the YouTube channel. So to those of you watching live and joining later, a very warm welcome, as I said, to our fourth in our series of EMI's Creation Care webinar. Here at EMI, we are feeling the responsibility of engineers, as architects, as designers, to design in a responsible way that cares for God's creation, that provides a positive impact and not a negative one. And we have the great privilege to work on some fantastic projects all around the world and in many disciplines. And we've done webinar series already on energy, on disaster relief. And one area where you'll see sometimes a more obvious impact than others is in the area of landscape architecture. And I'm delighted today to be welcoming Hannah and Erika, two landscape architects to present on this theme. Erika Watts is a licensed landscape architect with 6 years of experience in private practice and 9 years on staff with EMI. She works in our US office, but has lived overseas in Switzerland, Jordan, and Kenya. Hannah Arensen is a landscape architectural designer with 5 years of experience in private practice in the US, and she's been on staff with EMI for 4 years and is based in Uganda. So welcome, Erika, Hannah, great to have you with us. I will just kick us off with a short word of prayer, if that's okay. I was just reading Psalm 24, so I'm just going to use that as my inspiration. Oh, Heavenly Father, we come before you now and we just praise your name, Lord. This earth is yours and everything in it, the world and all who live in it. For you founded it on the seas and you established it on the waters. Lord, help us as we think about how we care, steward and cultivate your creation. And I pray your blessing on Erika and on Hannah right now as they speak to us, that you would bless their words and you would give us ears to hear and eyes to see what it is that they have to share. Pray that in the name of Jesus. Amen. Wonderful. I should just add, if you have any questions for Erika and Hannah during the talk, do please drop those in the chat and we'll pick those up at the end. So Erika, over to you.
Thank you, Rob. We are excited to get the chance to present to you on this topic today. Hannah and I are both passionate about landscape architecture and creation care, as well as the mission of EMI. And so we are grateful to have this opportunity to share a little bit more about our profession. There we go. So this is just a brief outline of what we are going to cover. So first, we'll look at what is landscape architecture, and then landscape architecture more specifically as creation care, and then some developing world applications, and then how do we connect people to creation? And then we will have some time for questions and discussion at the end, like Rob mentioned. So please do note whatever questions or comments you have, as we'd love to address those later on. So first off, what is landscape architecture? It is important to us to communicate what our profession does, so we're all on the same page and working within the same understanding of this discipline. One way of looking at it is, if architecture is the box, then landscape architecture is everything outside the box. And we like to think about designing the spaces that are formed between buildings. So if you look at the picture on the right, thinking about laying out buildings with the negative space in between them as part of that design, and thinking about how those spaces will be used, who the people are that will use them, how are they moving through that area. We also talk about it as creating outdoor rooms, designing in a way to create a sense of identity and a sense of place. And so the same process that architects use to design buildings, we use to design a site. So what do landscape architects do? Landscape architects create healthy, safe, and beautiful outdoor spaces for everyone. They bring science and design together to make our communities better places to live, work, and play. And I think it's important just to point out that landscape architects bring a holistic approach to design that includes the integration of architecture, engineering, and the environment. So we have the ability to be cross-cultural in that regard. And landscape architects help us partner with creation rather than work against it. And I'm just going to quickly kind of go through some different examples of the types of projects that landscape architects are involved in. So we design all types of outdoor spaces, both public and private. We do a lot of master planning. We are specifically trained in master planning. So this is why I always encourage, particularly our EMI project leaders, when we have a master planning project, to include landscape architects in that. And this example on the left is just a master plan that I was involved in that was a children's village in Uganda. And just as an example, what we were doing in that process was locating the different buildings on the site. I'm not sure if you can see my cursor here, but determining where the main entrance would be, how the vehicular circulation would work on the site, as well as pedestrian circulation, locating recreational facilities where there should be a soccer field, playground, and then looking at the existing features of the site. In this case, there was a large amount of existing vegetation in the middle, and we wanted to maintain that. And there were some existing clearings within that. And so that's where we located these clusters of housing within those existing clearings so that we could maintain the majority of the existing tree canopy. And then locating agriculture in flatter areas that did not have any existing vegetation. So that's just sort of an example of the types of things that might go into a master planning project. We also do road and building layout, what we call site development, and landscape architects are involved in both residential and commercial development projects. We also do parking design. This is one thing where, as landscape architects, we're always thinking about wanting to have people have a positive experience of a site as they enter, and thinking about what their first impression will be, which at least in the West is often by car. And so when we design parking, we do try to make it a positive space. And so designing those well that are clear, and then also are including things like islands and trees and lighting and pedestrian walkways to make those more pleasant spaces. We also do a lot of grading and drainage. So civil engineers do this as well, but landscape architects are specifically trained in this in our programs. So we have a large awareness of topography and how to site buildings in a way to minimize the amount of earthwork on a site. And also thinking about water flow and how to address stormwater and other things like that on a site as well. We also do larger scale city planning and urban design, looking at larger communities for open space planning and connectivity. We often in those projects will engage the community and invite feedback from the residents of those areas. And then we will do things like streetscapes and greenways that are actually often providing regional connections. In addition, we design plazas, what we call more hardscape. That includes things like determining the type of paving. Sometimes it includes fountains or lighting, site furniture, retaining walls, all of that type of thing we design as well. We do a lot of public parks and sports complexes, including all kinds of laying out different recreational facilities like soccer fields and baseball fields, playgrounds. We do a lot of that, of making spaces that are engaging for children to play outside. And then we also do planting design. And when we do that, we're looking at plants that are regionally appropriate and then looking at characteristics like height and texture and color and things like that that will really work together to make a beautiful site. And so I want to point out that, I put planting design last here, that yes, we do planting design, but it's only one small part of what we do. So as you've seen in the earlier slides, landscape architecture is much broader than that and encompasses all aspects of site planning, not just plantings. Another part of the mission of landscape architecture is to engage and benefit people as well as the environment. So we feel like if it's good for the environment, it's good for people. So clean water equals less disease, and tree canopy equals shade for people to keep cool. And well-designed public spaces offer safety, stimulation, and stress reduction. So that's just something that we like to mention, that we are always thinking about the combination of those two elements. And now we are going to move into looking at landscape architecture more specifically as creation care. And I'm going to turn it over to Hannah.
All right. Thank you, Erika. I'm really excited to talk with you all today about landscape architecture as creation care. The title for this section actually came about as I was talking about landscape architecture with a colleague of mine and explaining all of the different kinds of things that we do. And his response was, "Oh, so it is creation care." And I said, "Yes, it is. You can't separate landscape architects from the environment. We're just too closely intertwined." And so this section is where I'm just going to take you through what our profession is up to. And a great way to do that is to go through the mission areas of the American Society of Landscape Architects. So I'm going to refer to it as ASLA going forward. So landscape architecture itself, the term was actually established in 1840, and the ASLA was founded in 1899. So it's been around for a while, and it encompasses, we've got over 15,000 members, landscape architects across the United States who are a part of this organization. So a great litmus test to see what is the profession up to and what are landscape architects passionate about is by looking at the mission areas of the American Society of Landscape Architects. So landscape architects live and breathe sustainability. We balance environmental, social, and economic concerns in every space we design. But these areas are places where we're really passionate. So there's green infrastructure, which I'll talk a little bit more about later, racial equity, climate action, transportation for all. How do we make our streets safe for pedestrians, vehicles, cyclists, water and stormwater. We are experts in stormwater management, and parks and recreation. How do we help people get engaged with the outdoor environment? So I just want to point out those three things: environmental, social, and economic benefits every single space we design, we are focusing on those things. Another great litmus test is to look at student work and what is being celebrated in our universities. And so I just wanted to roll through a few different projects from different universities that have been awarded recently. So this is a project from Auburn University, and it's all about dam revitalization. The next one is about adaptive regeneration of our riverfront. So how do we restore this riverfront, make sure that there's no erosion and that it has a healthy ecosystem, while also bringing people into it by creating public spaces for them to access. And then this last one is all about how do we restore the cypress grove, in this example, the cypress grove that had died off. How do we restore it so that way the community next door doesn't get flooded anymore? But how do we also involve the community in that restoration process? So those are just a few examples of what our students are doing right now, which I think gives a great view of kind of where our profession is heading and how we're just so integrated with ecological systems. This is the Biodiversity Primer for Landscape Architects that was produced by the ASLA, and it is a document that helps us benchmark how are we doing with our biodiversity on our projects? How can we get better? Here are some useful tools to do that. There's another nonprofit called the Landscape Architecture Foundation, and they're doing some amazing work as well. Here's a quote from them. It says, "No matter how sustainability is defined, carbon neutral, net zero water, biodiversity, livability, it cannot be achieved without considering the landscape." And I think that's a really easy trap that we can fall into, where we're so busy trying to quantify things through material selection and other ways that we forget to pay attention to the site and engaging people in creation through the site. So the Landscape Architecture Foundation produced a document and actually a website called the Landscape Performance Series. And what it does is it showcases different projects where they've been able to see and measure the impact. So landscape architects have been working on issues of sustainability and resiliency for the last century. We're really, really excited about this stuff, okay? We live and breathe it. And so this Landscape Performance Series provides not only case studies to look at, but also a set of measuring tools so we can start to measure that impact and then show that to people and say, hey guys, landscape architects have been doing this and we want to keep doing this. So the next section I want to talk about is how we focus on ecological impact. And so before I get into that, I just want to remind you of those three things we focus on as landscape architects in every single project, regardless of the scale, whether it's a really tiny site or whether it's a massive, acres upon acres of land. We're focusing on the environmental impact. We're focusing on the social impact. How are we building communities? And we're focusing on the economic impact. How is what we're doing helping the economy? And this often, comes about in our streetscape design. How do you create really nice streets so pedestrians want to walk on them and then they can buy things from the shops? And there's a really significant amount of economic impact that we can have. So landscape architecture, as you've seen from Erika's slides and even me talking, it's a really broad profession. I like to call it a mile wide, inch deep profession, because we need to know a little bit about a lot of different things, but then we get to specialize in different things. And so the next few projects I want to show you are just examples of projects that specialize on that are a specialization in ecological impact, or are a good example of something that we kind of all do anyway and is focused towards ecological impact. So one of the things that all landscape architects do and are excited about is green infrastructure. So green infrastructure uses filtration, infiltration, and evapotranspiration to treat and soak up rainwater where it falls. And the key phrase there is where it falls. We don't want to be, storing it and then shooting off to our neighbors. And the developing world is often like, just shoot it out to the road and the road erodes away and all these issues. We want to capture it where it falls and get it to go back into the ground. We want to treat it so that it's cleaned. And we can do that through using soil medium and planting design so the water is purified as it goes down and then starts to restore our groundwater. which is important. So as you see from this photo, there are lots of different types of green infrastructure, but this is the classic example, which is bioretention. So we have a drainage layer, we're looking at different soil mediums and figuring out how to get the water in the ground quickly and efficiently. But on the left, you'll see it's also planted and it's engaging. In every single one of these projects that have an ecological focus, you'll still see we're trying to engage people in those projects. So another example is urban forestry. We're really passionate about having our cities have trees in them, and there are really good reasons for that. So on the picture on the left, you can see the street without trees and the street with trees, and the street without trees has it's 40C, and then at the pavement it's 46C, but with trees it's 32 and 34. And not only do we want to reduce urban heat island effect, which has a really big impact on local ecological systems, but also, doesn't it look nicer to walk down the street with trees on it? I would rather walk down the street with trees. And there are a lot of reasons why I would rather do that. It's amazing the amount of research that's come out in recent years talking about how nature is really good for both our physical and our psychological well-being. So it's amazing that we were created to need creation. It's almost like it was designed for us. Nature provides for both our physical and psychological needs. So we as landscape architects get to incorporate that. So another form of green infrastructure is green roofs. These are really fun to design. Doing on-structure green roofs is just a way to put a park in a city when you don't have any more green space in that city. Another type of speciality within landscape architecture is stream restoration. You can see the before and after images here. The before image, you see there's a lot of erosion, there's algae growth, there are all these issues. And on the right, you'll see not only is the stream restored, there's movement, there's healthy edging and edges, but also people are there. We want to bring nature to people. We want to bring people to nature. That's just such a core value for landscape architects. Another cool specialty is quarry restoration. I love this project. I just think it's so beautiful and just an amazing example of how design can take anything and make it new again. And as believers, we are a part of the restoration process. So it's just a really cool way that we get to restore. Another example of restoration is brownfield restoration. Brownfields are essentially soils that have been polluted by industry or other means. And there are landscape architects who specialize in types of planting design and soil work that helps remediate those soils so that they're usable again. And then shoreline restoration is also just I just think it's such a cool part of landscape architecture. It's such a cool speciality, talking about how do we restore our shorelines to prevent flooding and create healthy ecosystems. And then my last example for all these is wetland restoration. It's been amazing to see around the world how people have realized the value of wetlands. We need wetlands and our estuaries to take the impact of storm surges from hurricanes and other, rising waters and all of these issues. Wetlands are so critical for both purifying the water and preventing flooding. So wetland restoration is also something that landscape architects specialize. And I love this photo because you can see that beautiful little trail going through it, because you can't restore a wetland without putting a trail in. Just, you have to engage people in it in some way. And so it's just a cool example of that. So next, I want to get into developing world applications. So we face a lot of different challenges in the developing world as landscape architects, and figuring out, how do we apply this knowledge, this expertise that we have in different contexts within the developing world. And as I've mentioned, we're really, really research focused. In fact, most of the big landscape architecture firms will have an entire research department just devoted to, okay, well, how can we make this better? Or how can we purify water better through these different planting designs? Or how can we, what can we do with soil to help solve these different problems? We're so research based. And something about the developing world is that we're just we're just pretty data starved. When I first came to Uganda, it was really hard to figure out, should I plant anything? I don't know. Is this, I have no research. So that's a big challenge that we face. And it's easy to think, oh, like, look at all those amazing, like, fancy projects that Hannah just showed us. Are they trying to get, that looks like there's lots of funding and we need to get way up here. But I love at EMI, what we're passionate about is of course, yeah, we want to hit that goal of like, let's have an amazing project where we're really doing a great job with sustainability and restoration. And we kind of see it as a ladder. And if that's the top of the ladder and we're down here with our ministry partner who's like, well, my budget's really small, as much as it'd be great to get here, our goal as EMI is to just get one rung up the ladder. So how can we just make that big of a difference, that leap to really have an impact? And it's really easy to do that through landscape architecture on a really low budget. You don't need to have a really large budget to have impact there. And at EMI, we believe that good design transcends budget. We believe that about architecture. We believe that good architecture makes our ministries more sustainable. It helps them function better, function for longer. And that's the same applied to landscape architecture. And so you can see on the photo on the left, just this parking lot in Senegal, just that, it's not really high budget. It's just some trees and some paint. And there are curbs, but you could even get rid of the curbs if you needed to. It's not that it's a high budget project, it's that it was really well thought out and that the site was thought about and the entrance to this site was thought about. So that's a great example. On the right, you can see we have a pavilion. This is at the Gem Village here in Uganda. And, having covered outdoor spaces is really valuable, especially as EMI, we work in a lot of climates where it's just beautiful all year round. And walls are expensive. So where can we have outdoor gathering spaces and not have to pay for walls? So there are a lot of really great ways that landscape architects can work within the site to allow for those community spaces without a lot of cost. Another thing that we do really well is understand the impact of development on the ecological systems around us. We're going to take a look at a site and really investigate it. So we get the benefit of being able to look at the site like an architect would look at the site. In the same way, look at the site as a civil engineer would look at the site, while also bringing in this element of ecological awareness and understanding the ecological systems that this development will impact. So a great example of that is the Gem Village again in Uganda here. They have a farm. And when we were talking with them and doing a master plan update, they, were talking about wanting to plant eucalyptus trees. While this farm is mainly irrigated by a swamp. And they wanted to plant the eucalyptus trees like right next to the swamp. And we were like, oh, wait, don't do that. Eucalyptus trees they'll soak up all your water. They're really thirsty. So we don't want to put those in that space because it's gonna ruin your farming. And so having somebody on our project trips and having somebody in our offices that can say, actually, the ecological impact of that is gonna be really bad for our client, or it's gonna be really bad for our client's neighbors, is really valuable. The other thing that we're constantly doing is, and this is no matter where you are in the world, as a landscape architect, you have a part in this. We are navigating cultural perceptions of wild. Whether you live in the West, whether you live in Southeast Asia, whether you live in Africa or Eastern Europe or anywhere, we all have different cultural perceptions of the wilderness and different cultural relationships to the wilderness. And so sometimes those relationships are really negative. So in Uganda, when somebody buys a piece of land, before they develop it, they clear cut it immediately. Before they even know what they're building, they just clear cut it, gone. 100-year-old trees just gone. Not because, they think, oh, I really want to cut this tree down, but because they're like, ooh, you know what? It's just better to get a clean slate. And the wilderness is a place where, sketchy stuff happens over there. And, there are snakes in there, and we do not like snakes. And for good reason. So even as EMI, as we're looking at, okay, how can we, incorporate more green infrastructure? If you look on the photo of the right, that's a bioretention basin. That's just kind of standard bioretention basin in the northeastern United States, which is where I worked before. So that's where the example's from. Standard bioretention basin. And any of my Ugandan colleagues would look at that and say, Hannah, what about the snakes? Like, what are we going to do about that? So we're constantly working on how can we reconcile people to creation? How can we do these things without inviting venomous snakes into our, campus? So there are those kinds of challenges that we're constantly going to be battling. And no matter where you are in the world, you'll be having those kinds of conversations as a landscape architect. So some of the things we are doing is we are testing some green infrastructure practices. So this is Empower International Academy here in Uganda. On the left, you can see a concrete trench. This is the standard stormwater management application in Uganda, open concrete trench. So there are a few issues with this. One, it's open, so it's actually pretty dangerous. Like kids can fall inside, and that's not really good. The water, when it comes down hard, and it goes really fast. And so if we're shooting it out to the road, which is often common practice, it just ends up eroding that road away. Or worse, you're shooting it out to your neighbor's property and it's damaging their property. So how can we get away from that? So on the right-hand side is an example of an installation that we've done at Empower to try and mitigate that. And we've just kind of tested it out. We threw in essentially an absorption pit and have covered it with a plant that isn't going to get high. It's not going to attract snakes. It's just going to be there to kind of keep that soil there and help the water get infiltrated back into the site where as close to where it fell down as possible. Another thing we get to do is encourage our ministry partners. This is a great example of a church in downtown Kampala. This is a design charrette that we got to do with them. The EMI MENA office led this design charrette, and it was really just 2 days, and we hammered it out with them. And they have a really small site. It's small. But as we were talking about when, okay, we want to look at this and we want to see it and we want to know it's a church when we look at it. And part of that was having some green space. And right now they have green space and they really just want to preserve it as much as possible. So we were just coming up with different ideas of, well, how can we achieve what you want to achieve in, by developing the site while maintaining some of that green space, or at least incorporating some more planting or something into that space so that it is a nod to new creation. And as a church, wanting to celebrate that and encourage that and bring that hope to the community is really powerful. And then at the end of the day, as landscape architects at EMI, we just want to maximize the use of our green spaces and foster connection. It's easy to just focus on, okay, well, we need to design this structure and put it on the site, as opposed to we need to design this site and make sure that it goes from a site to becoming a campus. And how can we maximize the use of those spaces, especially in places where climates are really good and nice all year round? And then how can we foster connection, both between people so they can connect with each other within the outdoor environment, but also how do we foster connection between people and creation? And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Erika again.
Great. Thank you so much, Hannah. So what can we do to help connect people to creation in our designs? And we just had a few takeaways and closing thoughts on this. And so while it's important to consider environmental factors in our designs, part of our role as designers is to engage the people that are using a given site. And we want to help people engage with nature and the world around them. And at the same time, part of our God-given role as Christians is stewardship of the environment. And the earth and its resources are not only for our benefit to be used, but also to be cared for and sustained in a way that would make the master gardener proud. So we also believe that creating beauty is valued by God. So our goal is that our designs would not just be functional, but also beautiful. Aesthetics do matter, and our desire is to create a positive experience for people as they engage with the environment. We also need to remember that creation care is not necessarily always quantitative. We want to be able to measure the impact of things we're doing in our designs, and that's important. We value that also. But there is also something qualitative about good design that cannot be ignored. And there are often qualities of landscape architectural design in particular that can be harder to measure, such as improvement in quality of life or sense of community. So this is an example at the GEM playground in this photo. This space gives these children with disabilities a positive experience with the outdoors, the chance to interact with others, and in a space that is accessible and designed to meet their needs. So it's trying to address all of those things at the same time. I just want to give a little shout out to Hannah here, who was very involved in the design and construction management of this project, and it was just recently finished, and we are just so pleased with how it turned out. We were very excited that this project was featured in our September issue of Landscape Architect and Specifier News. And one thing that's also unique about this project is that it utilized 9 landscape architect volunteers, and we couldn't have done that design without them. So we would really encourage you to include landscape architects on your project teams and value their expertise. If you are a landscape architect and are interested in possibly volunteering on one of our projects or coming on staff, please reach out to either Hannah or I, and we'd be glad to talk with you more about that. Another thing to remember is that the design of the outdoor environment is important. It should not be an afterthought because green spaces benefit health and well-being. So as we can see on this slide, there are so many benefits to green infrastructure, the things that Hannah was talking about earlier with bioretention or just vegetated swales or just any green spaces in general, street trees, permeable paving, things like this. We can see in that center circle how many environmental benefits there are. But like Hannah was also mentioning, there are also economic and social benefits to that as well. And as we can see in this quote from the Harvard School of Public Health, exposure to green space has been linked to better sleep, lower blood pressure, and reduced risk of chronic disease. And spending time in nature has been linked to better mental health for both adults and children. And green spaces in healthcare settings have been shown to improve health outcomes. So we need to value the importance of good site design just as much as building design. We need to encourage our clients to make sure they're reserving enough budget for site improvements and plantings so that they're not viewed as just extra or bonus. There are many challenges in the developing world to sustainable design, and Hannah mentioned several of these already. But just again, to acknowledge that, we have all these great ideas and can tend to be a little idealistic at sometimes, but we are aware that there are these obstacles. And so how can we address those? There's little to no environmental regulation in most of our developing world contexts. And so this is a real issue, how do you get somebody to do the right thing when it's not actually required by law? So that is a real barrier. Just the cultural values and perception of the environment, like Hannah mentioned earlier, client priorities and funding constraints, the lack of funding is real. And so we just realized that our ministry partners are often working within a really tight budget. When you're focused on just survival, it can feel like there just isn't room for anything extra. And that's part of the reason I'm part of our creation care working group at EMI. And one of the things we've been doing is looking into, are there other funding sources out there specifically for sustainability projects that could help be able to address some of these things when our clients may not have the money for it. And then just also that we're working within data-starved environments, and that prevents large-scale change. So just the lack of research to really guide and direct where the priorities should be. But we are starting to see signs of hope. So I just wanted to end with a couple of examples that just do give us hope for the future, that some of these values of creation care can be implemented in our projects. So these photos are from an EMI designed project in Senegal. And you can see how on this campus, the courtyard design is well thought out and intentional. Plantings were made a priority. And now, as you can see from the photo on the right, people are benefiting from shade and having a central gathering space where they can connect. EMI also recently completed this sustainability assessment and master plan for Santiago Christian School in the Dominican Republic, and that was led by our EMI Nicaragua office. And one of the things they did was use this sustainability assessment tool called SPEAR that produces these circle diagrams that you can see on the left. And looking at kind of the existing state of some of their facilities related to sustainability, and realizing that there are needs there and wanting over time to improve those. So kind of going from this red and orange status and moving over time to green. And so you can see also in their map of impact, part of the master plan on the right, of the different things they were able to recommend that addressed some of these sustainability issues. And I was just really encouraged to see that they also included a school garden and an outdoor prayer space that perhaps wouldn't have been as much of a priority if it hadn't been for this bigger conversation that they were having related to sustainability. Stay tuned for a full webinar that will be dedicated to this project coming up in the new year. So just to end, we are seeing movement toward awareness of creation care in our designs, even in the developing world, and are hopeful for continued forward progress in the future. But we just have to remember that our mindset is important. Realizing that aesthetically pleasing, environmentally sensitive design can be achieved if it is valued by the client and the designer. So that is all we have, and we would love to hear any questions or comments you all have.
Erika, Hannah, thank you so much. That was fascinating. I really enjoyed that, and I'm sure everyone else did. And as Erika said, if you have any questions, please do put those in the chat. And thanks to those who've already popped on there to introduce themselves and where they're from. So much from that, guys. I really enjoyed it, and in particular, I guess this point, that's something that every single one of our projects, EMI or any architect, engineer, designer has, something that we have in common is that all our projects impact the landscape that they're in. And what you guys are talking about is how can we not just reduce the negative impacts, so maybe excessive stormwater runoff, urban heat island effect, like you say, but introduce that beauty, that delight, that comes from really celebrating creation and ecological diversity. And Hannah, something you said that I love there is that when we do that well, then we bring people into those spaces, we bring people together and into those places, and we foster that connection, almost as if we were created to need creation. What do you know? And isn't that wonderful that our Lord, the designer of all these things, knows that we actually yearn for this, and what a privilege you guys have in encouraging us to sort of re-engage with that. So thank you for sharing some interesting ways in which you've done that. One question I had, you talked there about the many challenges in the global south that we might face, lack of data, lack of regulation, venomous snakes. I'm interested to know how you did encourage them to well, how do you get rid of venomous snakes when you create some of those spaces? But I just wonder what mm, having worked in the US and then working sort of in the global South, and perhaps particularly for you, Hannah, living in Uganda, what are some of the real sort of positives or things that you've seen in a new way that brought you delight when you think about landscape architecture and the sort of the context of the environment out there?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think something that at least the central region of Uganda where I live has going for it is that everything grows. Um, and so that comes with kind of both a positive and somehow a negative. The positive is that, it's really lush. Like even if you're looking behind me, it's just a really lush environment. It's easy to get things to grow. The challenge that comes alongside of that is everyone's like, well, everything grows and everything grows really quickly. So if we cut it down, it's not a big deal. So I've been trying to explain the impacts of that, but overall, I think it's been a really amazing learning experience over the past 4 years of learning about those cultural perceptions of wilds and being able to kind of engage my colleagues in that has been really fun. And it's really encouraging. The EMI Uganda office has started to really take a good close look at their sites and how are we including site design as a part of everything. We're not just designing buildings and putting them on a site, but we're including the site in the design process and designing it to its fullest capacity if we can. And that's been really encouraging.
Yeah, that's great. And actually, maybe related to the question we've had here from Jordana Dorka, where she's asked, how did the EMI team engage with the local population for the project? Doesn't specify which project, but say the GEM playground. How did you engage or do some of that site analysis involving sort of stakeholder feedback to sort of steer your designs on that or any other project?
Yeah, so I'll talk about the playground because I was involved in that. So when we did a master plan update for the GEM Foundation, I was in charge of that, leading that project team. And one of the things they said, oh, we'd really like a playground. To which I just kind of like the little flag went off in my brain of, ooh, you know, I've designed lots of playgrounds, but there are people out there who design inclusive playgrounds specifically. So back on my mind, I was thinking, okay, I need to get some cool volunteers for this project. But in the meantime, I needed to get that stakeholder feedback, and the stakeholders were the kids and the caretakers of the kids. And so what we did was we did a series of different types of feedback with the children, and also had some interviews with the staff, and were able to put out a survey and ask them, what do you see your kids needing the most of? What kind of sensory input do they need? How do they respond to this kind of sensory input versus this kind, with the kids themselves based on their various abilities, because we have everyone from at that ministry, there's everyone from really severe autism to they're wheelchair bound and nonverbal. And so how do you engage them? And so kind of trying different sensory activities. So I actually collected a bunch of different plants samples and brought them to site and had the kids kind of play with them and touch them and kind of give feedback. We also had them draw, those who could draw, we had them draw what's their favorite part about their home. And everybody drew the landscape. These kids, they all drew like the tree outside with the swing on it, or they drew the soccer pitch. And those are the kinds of things that they celebrated and enjoyed. So that was part of the feedback that we got. That community also received children from everywhere in Uganda, not just the central region. So we incorporated what we call the cozy hut, which is a nice, cool space. But it has, it kind of looks like a hut you would find in northern Uganda, to kind of give some kind of air of home for a lot of the kids who are coming from that area. So there are a lot of different ways that we can get that kind of engagement. And I think my background is more in community design, working in DC and Baltimore. And so I was able to kind of incorporate that. And how do we the best way to get feedback from stakeholders isn't by like a question and answer session. It's by activities and like, okay, put a sticker where you see this or those kinds of things. So I would say that landscape architects are also really good at getting feedback from stakeholders. So,
That's,
so
that's
like a little snippet, I guess, of some of the things that we were able to do in that project.
some of the things you do. No, that's really insightful. I love that. It's very creative. And Erika, I don't know if you've got any other examples you wanted to add to that in terms of stakeholder engagement.
I think that's a really great example that Hannah gave. And but I think that, just valuing their input is just so important. Like sometimes as designers, I think we can think like we know best for what people need, but really like we need to be designing for the actual people who are going to be using a given area, and their priorities really should be our priorities then. And so making sure we're taking the time to listen and figure out what those are is just really important, because they're not going to value the site or engage with it if it's not something that is jiving, with their own needs. So it's just really important in general. And we've done that. We really do that on all of our EMI projects as much as we can. And oftentimes we have that ability because we're like staying right on site and we can see how they're using it and talk to people more easily, which is great. So I've really enjoyed that aspect of what we do. Kind of going back to the first question too, with things that can actually be positive in the developing world. Hannah and I were having this discussion the other day, how in a lot of the contexts that we work, one thing that's positive from an environmental standpoint is that there's a lot less impervious surfaces. So in the West, we struggle with this a lot, that we just want to pave everything. And so it's actually a good thing that in a lot of the areas where we are, there's not as much of that. But then trying to also bring it up a notch of like, okay, but then a parking lot doesn't have to be just like a big dirt field with no delineation whatsoever. It can still be impervious. It doesn't have to be paved, but let's like define, where the area is, where the spaces are. Let's plant some trees, so there's still an element of like creating place that needs to happen, but it's actually kind of a good thing that there's a lot less like concrete jungle
Impermeable.
sometimes.
Yeah, wonderful. And I think Liz, one look sort of agrees with you there. Civil engineer, been on a number of volunteered on a number of projects, enjoying the overlap with the civil design, encouraging with stormwater aspects. Keep your questions coming, guys. We had a question. Where's it gone actually? Oh, it's got taken on. Okay, we've got another question. Are clients generally receptive of things like natural stormwater management, or how do you go emphasizing the value of that? So that picks up a little bit on the point you were just making. Do one of you want to tackle that one?
I'll tackle it. Yeah, so we are just starting to introduce this to some of our clients in Uganda. We are benefited by our research and development department in Uganda, and we have an ecological engineer on staff with us. So he and I have been scheming for years about things like bioretention research and things like that. So I think when it comes to like natural stormwater, or I guess like ecologically engineered stormwater management, I think it's definitely something that is, we're not really sure I guess we haven't introduced it to so many clients that I can give you like a solid, like they all think it's awesome or they all really can't stand it. I think it depends a lot on the site, because the stormwater, if you're focusing on like, how can we reduce stormwater in a more ecologically sustainable way? That changes based on your site. Every site is different. So it could be a planted swale, or it could be some sort of constructed wetland system or something like that. So it kind of depends site by site. I would say that, when I was able to introduce the idea of, well, wait, what if we plant this giant, there was a site where we had a big ditch, and they were like, well, we need to cover it up and, put a culvert in and cover it and all those things. Because we're worried about kids falling in it and we're worried about these things. We just need it to be gone. But we're also planning on redoing our whole parking area in a few years. And if we do that, we're going to have to redig it all and fix it then. And so I was able to suggest, hey, we could just plant it with something that's going to retain the soil so it doesn't erode away. And then we'll plant. This is what I like to do when I try and keep people away from things. So you just plant spiky plants around it. You plant aloe and you plant all these plants that people don't want to wander into. And that can kind of provide a natural barrier to that. And they were really receptive to that because it was so much less expensive. And so a lot of times these solutions can be a lot less costly. And so they're really receptive to that when it's less costly and we can still solve the problem and solve it with planting design, which I would argue is just a tool. It's a tool in our toolbox as landscape architects that we can use. You can use it to direct traffic. You can use it to help stormwater be infiltrated. It's a great tool, and we were able to use it in that example. So I can't give you a good answer for that, is my answer. But
it's a great answer. And when we hit that sweet spot on environmental, social, and economic sustainability, that really is where we're aiming at, isn't it? Gosh, we've been going for a while. Actually, I lost track of time. We should probably wrap up there. Just got a couple of notices, but I thank you for those people who've put in a few extra comments in the chat. One was asking about how do we get in touch for project proposals, etc. Oh, someone's already responded on that. You can go to our website at emiworld.org services if you're interested in any of the services that we provide here at EMI. And thank you, Erika, for mentioning about encouraging volunteers. If you're a landscape architect and you'd be interested in volunteering on an EMI project, if you haven't before, please also go to our website there and the Join tab, and you'll see some of the project trips coming up or other events that you can engage with and find out more about EMI. I've got a project coming up in Belize in January, just to give a plug, and I would love to have a landscape architect on that project, a really interesting one. But that and many other projects will be on that website, so do please check that out. You will see on that slide next to questions says CEO update November 13th. That QR code will take you to a link on the website as well. If you're on the website, you just find under the Join tab events, and that is our CEO update from John Dorman. Do look out for that. And as Erika mentioned, we're not done yet with the webinar series. This is the last session we have, one we have for this year, but we will be back in the new year, probably in February. Do watch this space where we're going to be looking at holistic sustainability assessments, how the Creation Care working group has been looking across the wide array and suite of different assessments that are out there, why we chose to go with SPEAR on a recent project. We will be talking about that project that Erika mentioned and others besides. So that promises to be really interesting. Do look out for that, and we look forward to welcoming you back for that talk. But for now, from Erika, Hannah, and myself, thank you for joining us as we've looked at this fascinating topic, and just praying blessings on the rest of your day, wherever you guys are. Peace on.